At a port of embarkation in the autumn of 1945, an ordnance sergeant works down a line of open footlockers the way a bank teller counts a drawer, one item at a time. A pistol comes out, wrapped in a sock, a captain's signature folded beside it on a mimeographed slip, and the sergeant sets both aside without a word. Then, under the wool of a folded uniform, something else. No signature covers it. No signature ever could. 2 rules governed that table, and neither one had much to do with the war anyone thought they were fighting. War Department Circular 353, printed on August 31, 1944, let a soldier keep a captured weapon as his own property if an officer signed a certificate for it. But the circular said, in its own printed language, that the certificate covered nothing containing an explosive charge, and nothing whose value to the Army's own research and intelligence outweighed its value as a keepsake. The National Firearms Act of 1934 sat entirely outside that system, older than the circular by 10 years, and blind to any signature a captain in Bavaria might supply. An unregistered machine gun was a federal felony the day it was manufactured, and a battlefield certificate never touched federal law at all. In 1945, those 2 rules caught the machine guns and the live charges fast, because a receiver built for automatic fire and a grenade with its pin still announced themselves to anyone trained to look for them. What they were slower to catch was everything that looked, for a moment, like an argument a reasonable man could win. A flare pistol, a ceremonial blade, a sound suppressor the size of a beer can, harmless, right up until someone with the right training turned it over and read what it actually was. 25 of those objects follow, a range from the ones a soldier could plausibly argue about, through the ones that were never his to keep at all, to the ones that are still, on a rotating basis nearly every year, detonating in American houses. Number 12 is a rifle so rare that fewer than 30 legal examples exist in the entire country. Number 1 killed a father in his own living room in the spring of 2023, 78 years after the war that manufactured the object that did it. Number 25, the Sturmpistole with the rifled Wurfkörper insert. The Leuchtpistole was, on its own, the least threatening object a German soldier carried. A stubby, break-action flare gun, smoothbore, built to arc colored light over a battlefield so gunners could find their own infantry in the dark. Fitted with a rifled barrel insert and loaded with the Wurfkörper 361 explosive projectile, it stopped being a signal device and became something the Wehrmacht issued for close anti-tank and anti-personnel work. A muzzle-loaded grenade launcher wearing the silhouette of a toy. A GUI who pocketed a plain Leuchtpistole had, in the practical sense, taken nothing more dangerous than a road flare with a trigger. A GI who pocketed one with the rifled insert already threaded in, or who found the insert loose in the same ammunition crate and kept both out of simple curiosity, had picked up exactly the object Circular 353 excluded by name, whether he understood the difference or not. An explosive firing weapon disguised as a harmless one. The distinction has not softened with age. Rifling is still the line federal law draws between an ordinary flare gun, tolerated without much comment, and a regulated destructive device that requires the same registration as a machine gun. The rare wartime examples that survive with the insert still fitted are handled today by the collectors who own them with almost exactly the caution a 1945 inspector was trained to show them. Verify number 24, the HUB-23 suppressor. Late in the war, German ordnance engineers built a clamp-on suppressor for the Karabiner 98K, the Gewehr 43, and the STG 44, a tube packed with cone-shaped baffles that cut a rifle's report by something close to 3/4 when it was paired with subsonic ammunition. It went to snipers and to the small units the Wehrmacht kept for work that needed to stay quiet and almost nowhere else. Total planned production ran to only about 1,000 units, and manufacturing problems shut the line down before that number was ever reached. A soldier who found one in a captured armory had found one of the rarest single pieces of equipment in the entire German inventory, and he had also found something the National Firearms Act had regulated on its own terms since 1934, a full decade before the war that produced it. A suppressor did not become legal because the rifle it rode on came with a certificate. The certificate covered the rifle. It said nothing about the tube screwed onto the muzzle. So few have surfaced since that specialists in the field described never having examined one closely, let alone seen one offered for sale. 80 years on, the Hub 23 is less a market price than a rumor collectors repeat to each other, waiting for the one that finally turns up in an estate nobody has cleaned out yet. Number 23, the Japanese officer's sword, the Shin Gunto. Many of these blades were not manufactured for the war at all. A Shin Gunto was a standardized military mounting, and a great many officers had their own family sword, sometimes centuries old, fitted into it before shipping out, so that the sword an American accepted at a surrender ceremony in Manila or aboard a ship in Tokyo Bay might be older than the empire that had just lost. The occupation government that followed Japan's surrender did not distinguish between the mass-produced wartime blades and the family heirlooms hiding inside them. Every sword in the country, civilian and military alike, was ordered turned in to the Foreign Liquidation Commission. Roughly 5,500 confiscated under that single directive, and the manufacture of new swords was banned outright until 1953. An entire craft interrupted by government decree rather than by the war itself. A blade, a G I managed to keep before the order caught up with his unit, sells today anywhere from several $100s for an ordinary wartime mounting stamped out to arm officers who had never held a sword before, to tens of thousands. For the older signed blade, some of those mountings turned out to be hiding all along. Number 22, the SS Honor Dagger. The SS Ehrendolch was standard issue regalia, forged by Solingen cutlers and etched along the blade with the motto, Meine Ehre heißt Treue, my honor is called loyalty, and it was still hanging from the belts of camp guards when American forces reached Dachau and Buchenwald in April of 1945. A dagger taken off a guard in those first days did not travel the same road as a battlefield pistol. War crimes investigators were already moving through the camps behind the liberating troops, cameras out, cataloging what they found for a tribunal that had not yet convened, and a piece of SS regalia pulled from a specific man in a specific uniform was as likely to be logged as evidence as it was to be pocketed as a keepsake. For a great many of these daggers, the next stop was an evidence table rather than a duffel bag. An ordinary SS dagger with clean paperwork sells today in the low thousands of dollars, one honor blade among the thousands the SS issued to men who never came near a camp. One that can be traced to a specific guard at a specific camp rarely reaches a price tag at all. An archive wants that kind of blade more than a collector does, and archives do not pay auction prices. Number 21, the Glasmine 43. Built almost entirely from glass instead of steel. A shallow bowl some 6 inches across, a molded glass pressure plate on top, a small charge sealed against moisture with ordinary cement putty. The Glasmine 43 existed to solve one specific German problem, the Allied mine detectors that could find anything with iron in it. Roughly 11 million were manufactured in the war's final 2 years, laid in the same fields as the metal mines beside them, indistinguishable to a detector sweeping for either one. That was also what made it dangerous long after the surrender. A curious soldier, or a farmer, clearing his own field years later, could dig one up and find nothing that read as a weapon at first glance. No oiled steel, no visible fuse, nothing but a shard of glass that looked like it belonged to a broken jar. The pressure plate did not care whether the hand pressing on it belonged to an enemy or to a man born after the war had already ended. An inert, demilitarized example is a genuine specialty item among ordnance collectors today, valued for exactly the ingenuity that made it briefly unbeatable. An intact, filled example is not a curiosity. It is still, by any legal definition and by simple physics, live. A mine built from glass could still pass as a curiosity for as long as it stayed in the ground, undiscovered. Nothing that follows had that argument available to it. A grenade launcher, a second mine, a third mine built to hurl itself upward and cut down whoever was standing over it. These were ordnance in the plainest sense, and ordnance had never been anyone's to keep. Number 20, the Type 89 grenade discharger, the weapon Americans called the knee mortar. It was a compact Japanese grenade launcher with a curved steel base plate designed to brace against the ground, and its American nickname came from a mistranslation, a Japanese phrase meaning leg mortar, garbled into knee mortar by men who had never been told otherwise. The curve of that base plate looked, to an untrained eye, exactly like something built to rest against a thigh. At least one Marine on Guadalcanal tried it that way and broke his own thigh bone on the recoil. Colonel Merritt Edson, who commanded the raiders in the Solomons, corrected the record himself in writing. The name was a misnomer. It was not fired from the knee, and the man in his unit who tried it broke his leg for the lesson. The Army manual printed afterward repeated the warning to everyone who came after him. Captured examples still came home, curved base plate, sight, and all, and customs inspectors treated them as exactly what they were: a functioning mortar rather than a curiosity a man had picked up on a beach. A complete example today draws real interest from collectors of Pacific ordnance, specifically because so many were destroyed on the spot, rather than allowed to leave the island where they were captured. Number 19, the Tellermine 35. 200 to 400 pounds of weight was all it took to trigger the Tellermine 35's pressure plate. A boot rarely managed it. The weight of a vehicle's tire almost always did. And the flat sheet steel case beneath it, a little over a foot across, carried roughly 12 pounds of TNT, waiting for exactly that much pressure. No certificate, however it was signed, made a live anti-tank mine a legal souvenir. Circular 353 excluded explosives in the plainest terms it had, and a soldier caught with an intact Tellermine at the dock lost it to an ordnance disposal detachment before he finished explaining where he had found it. Intent never entered into it. The mine did not care what a man meant to do with it once he got it home. Deactivated display examples are a common enough curiosity among militaria collectors now, sold with their fuse wells empty and their charge long removed. A genuine piece of German engineering rendered safe to hold. The ones still buried do not know the war is over. A plow blade or a backhoe trips the same pressure plate a tank tread once did, 8 decades late and just as effectively. Number 18, the S-mine, the Bouncing Betty. About the size of a large coffee can, the S-mine used a small propelling charge to throw itself roughly 3 feet into the air before its main charge went off, scattering shrapnel outward at roughly waist height rather than straight down at the one man who had triggered it. It needed as little as 15 pounds of pressure to fire, which meant it was built to kill or maim everyone standing near the man who found it, not just him. That design made it uniquely unsuited to any reading of Circular 353's own language. It was not merely explosive, it was explosive built specifically to injure at a distance, and a soldier who dug one up as a battlefield relic, thinking its bounding mechanism made an interesting story, was holding something engineered to do exactly what it had done to the infantry it was designed for. There was no certificate an officer could sign that touched it, and no argument a customs man was obligated to entertain. The men who tried anyway did so at a risk the paperwork never covered, then or now. Every S-mine recovered since has gone the same way an artillery shell does, to a disposal unit, not a display case, whatever story arrived with it. Number 17. The Type 99 light machine gun. Chambered for Japan's harder-hitting 7.7mm cartridge and built in numbers reaching roughly 53,000, the Type 99 was the standard Japanese squad automatic of the war's second half, taken by the crate load from overrun positions across the Pacific as American units pushed from island to island. A fully automatic weapon did not become a legal souvenir because a captain had signed for it in a jungle clearing. The National Firearms Act of 1934 had made an unregistered machine gun a federal felony a full decade before the war that produced this one had even begun, and no theater-level souvenir policy anywhere in the Pacific carried the authority to override a federal statute. The certificate a man carried home with his Type 99 proved only that an officer had witnessed the capture. It proved nothing at all to the Treasury Department. A small number were properly registered in the years when that path was still open, and those examples are worth tens of thousands of dollars today, the tax stamp doing as much work as the receiver. Every unregistered example is worth precisely what it was worth at the dock in 1945. A federal indictment, sitting quietly in whatever closet has held it since. Number 16. The Type 96 light machine gun. The older of Japan's two standard light machine guns, chambered in the smaller 6.5mm cartridge and produced in similar numbers of roughly 41,000, the Type 96 was distinctive for its top-mounted magazine and, on a great many examples, a bayonet lug welded beneath the barrel, a light machine gun built, at need, to double as a spear. Its capture followed the same arithmetic as the newer weapon that partly replaced it. A fully automatic Japanese weapon carried the identical unregistered machine gun status under the 1934 Act as anything taken off a German soldier in the Ardennes, and the flag stitched to a captured receiver made no difference at all to a federal statute that had never once mentioned nationality. Whatever island it came from, whatever hand had fired it last, the law that met it at the port did not distinguish. Legally registered survivors draw serious money now from collectors who specialize in Japanese ordnance specifically, a narrower and more particular market than the one built around German war trophies. The far larger number never passed through any registration process at all, and most of the men who carried them home never went back to check what that meant for the gun in the attic. Japan supplied roughly half of the unregistered machine guns that came home in 1945. Germany supplied the rest, in numbers and order of magnitude larger, and the arithmetic only gets less forgiving from here. Number 15. The MG-34. Machined rather than stamped, expensive to build in a way German industry could no longer sustain once the war turned against it. The MG-34 was produced in numbers exceeding 570,000 between 1935 and 1945, and it stayed in first-line service alongside its cheaper successor all the way to the surrender. Its top cover and receiver were finished to a standard closer to a hunting rifle than a weapon meant to be dragged through mud, and that finish is exactly what collectors prize in it today. None of that finish changed its legal status by a single word. A machined receiver capable of full automatic fire was an unregistered machine gun the moment it touched American soil, regardless of which unit's captain had signed the slip that came with it, and the National Firearms Act had settled that question in 1934, before the first MG-34 receiver was ever forged. Some were deactivated for the trip home, arriving as inert display pieces rather than working guns. The properly registered survivors bring serious money today, prized specifically for their early, hand-finished manufacture. The unregistered ones sit in the same closets and attics as the rest of this list, finished to a standard no felony charge has ever cared about. Number 14. The MP-40. Stamped from sheet steel rather than machined, cheap to manufacture and simple enough to strip in the dark, the MP40 was built in numbers estimated at well over 1 million, the weapon Americans habitually and incorrectly called the Schmeisser, and the sound, in 100 later accounts, that meant German infantry was close. A GWII who wanted one badly enough to carry it all the way to the docks was carrying a full automatic weapon, and no signed slip of paper legalized that in 1945 any more than it does now. The same three paths applied to an MP40 as to every other machine gun on this list. Deactivation before the trip home, quiet surrender to a police department decades later once a widow or a son found it and got nervous, or, for the very few, proper registration in the years before the paperwork window closed for good. A legally registered, transferable MP40 commands a serious five-figure price today, a sum that has almost nothing to do with the gun and almost everything to do with the tax stamp riding along with it. Every unregistered one still makes the same sound it always did, whether or not anyone left alive still recognizes it as a warning. Number 13, the FG-42. Built for German paratroopers who needed a single rifle capable of full automatic fire and a rifle grenade launcher at once, the FG-42 was produced in only a few thousand units across its short production life. By some counts, as few as 2,000 of the original pattern reached troops, before the specialized steel it required was diverted to other programs the Reich judged more urgent. Almost none of them arrived in the United States with any legal path forward at all. A selective fire rifle this scarce was, by definition, an unregistered machine gun the instant it crossed a beach, and the tiny number properly registered before 1968 account for nearly the entire legal supply that exists anywhere in the country today. Only about 24 select fire transferable examples remain in private American hands, a number so small that most licensed dealers who specialize in registered machine guns have never personally handled one. A genuine example now sells for somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000, a price built almost entirely on how few of them, the war and the federal registry that followed it, ever allowed to survive intact. Number 12, the STG-44. The first true assault rifle ever mass-produced, firing a shortened 7.92mm cartridge from a 30-round magazine. In single shots or on full automatic, the STG-44 was built in a final total of roughly 426,000 units before the collapse, and every service rifle carried by every army on Earth today descends, in a traceable line, from the logic packed into its receiver. A weapon this significant to the future of infantry warfare could not simply ride home in a duffel bag and sit in a closet. The National Firearms Act had reached into the footlocker exactly as it reached into every other machine gun on this list, and the men who understood what they were holding often understood, in the same breath, that they could never legally fire it again once it was home. Legally transferable examples, registered before the relevant cutoffs, now sell for tens of thousands of dollars, a price that reflects the paperwork nearly as much as the rifle itself. The federal registry that could once have made an STG-44 legal has been closed since 1986, and nothing, no discovery, no estate, no forgotten crate in a barn, can ever be added to it again. Number 11, the Panzerschreck. Germany's answer to the American bazooka, an 88mm reloadable rocket launcher its own troops nicknamed the Ofenrohr, the stovepipe, for its plain steel tube. The Panzerschreck was built in numbers exceeding 280,000 and pushed down to squad level as German armor grew scarce, and infantry needed some way to stop a tank without one of their own nearby. The launcher itself held no propellant and no explosive charge, a length of pipe with sights welded on, in the strict sense, no more dangerous than the tube a plumber carries, which put it in a genuine gray area at the pier. The rockets it fired were a different matter entirely. A live 88mm warhead, loaded or separate, was unexploded ordnance. By any definition, Circular 353's authors would have recognized, and it went to ordnance disposal the moment an inspector's eyes found it. An inert cleared launcher tube remains a legitimate and fairly affordable piece of militaria today, sold and displayed without much controversy. The warhead that used to ride inside it went to a disposal unit decades ago, wherever it turned up, and no paperwork folded into the same crate ever bought it a different fate. A rifle or a machine gun was, at least, a weapon a man could argue belonged to him the way his own sidearm did, scaled up. What came next left no room for that argument at all. Number 10. The Panzerfaust warhead. Germany built more than 6 million of these disposable, one-shot anti-tank rockets in the war's final 2 years. The late-model Panzerfaust 100, capable of punching through 8 inches of armor at 30 yards, and overrun depots left the tubes stacked by the dozen. Compact enough once fired that an unfired warhead could disappear into a rucksack without a squad mate noticing the extra weight. An unfired shaped charge is not a curiosity. It is unexploded ordnance, carrying enough force to take off a hand at the wrist, and it fell under the same explosives exclusion that caught every grenade and mine already on this list. Anyone found in a soldier's gear at the dock went directly to a bomb disposal detachment. No certificate reached it, and no inspector needed to hear the argument for keeping it. A warhead that has since been cut open, cleared of its charge, and permanently rendered inert cells to collectors of ordnance for a few $100s today, valued for the shape rather than the substance. The men who carried the unfired kind home mostly said nothing about the extra weight in the rucksack, and most of them got away with saying nothing right up until an inspector's hands found it anyway. Number 9. The Minengeschoss aircraft cannon round. Developed from 1937 by Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken for Germany's 20mm aircraft cannon, the Minengeschoss was a thin-walled shell packed with RDX-based explosive and aluminum powder in place of solid steel, trading mass for blast and incendiary effect, and it entered service in 1940 aboard the cannon fitted to the Bf-109E4. A belt of it did more damage to an airframe than a much heavier solid round ever could. A handful of loose rounds pulled from a downed fighter or a captured airfield's ammunition stores was live explosive and incendiary ammunition, not brass and lead worth keeping as a curiosity, and it received the same treatment at the pier as an artillery shell, regardless of how ordinary a single cartridge looked resting in an open palm. Size told an inspector nothing useful about what a shell like this one actually was. The design outlived the war that produced it. Britain's Aden cannon and France's Difa cannon both adopted mine shell ammunition on the same basic principle after 1945, which means the round a customs officer confiscated as too dangerous to keep quietly became, within a decade, the standard for nearly every Western aircraft cannon built after it. Number 8. The mustard gas shell. Advancing British and American forces found German chemical depots stocked with artillery shells and aerial bombs filled with mustard agent by the tens of thousands. Material the Reich had manufactured and stored throughout the war, but never, for reasons historians still debate, released for use against the armies advancing from the West. There was no reading of Circular 353 or of any other regulation touching a soldier's personal effects under which a filled chemical shell passed as a trophy. Army Chemical Warfare Service teams seized these stockpiles in their entirety, moving them under armed guard through a channel that had nothing to do with the customs tables where pistols and rifles were being sorted at the very same moment. Between 1945 and 1947, an estimated 21,000 mustard bombs of various sizes were shipped from Europe to the United States under continuous guard, along with roughly 2,700 nitrogen mustard rockets recovered from the same stockpiles. None of it ever reached a private hand then or in the decades since. The object itself, a rusted steel casing, was never the point. What was inside it was the only thing anyone in Washington cared about. Number 7. The tabun-filled artillery shell. By 1945, German chemical plants had produced a nerve agent the Allies did not yet possess in any form of their own, and advancing forces found it loaded into shells and aerial bombs at sites like the proving ground at Raubkammer, storage nobody had briefed an ordinary infantry unit to expect. The shells looked, from the outside, exactly like any other artillery round stacked in the same depot. The object was worthless the moment it was identified. A rusting steel casing built to a standard artillery specification. The chemistry sealed inside it was the entire prize, and it moved directly into a classified Allied weapons program rather than anywhere near a returning soldier's kit. Seized in its entirety under armed guard, the instant intelligence teams confirmed what they had found. An estimated 40,000 tabun bombs and roughly 750 tabun artillery shells of various calibers were shipped from Europe to the United States between 1945 and 1947, quietly supplying the raw material for a nerve agent program the American public would not learn the outlines of for another generation. The program got the shells immediately. The public got the arithmetic decades late. Number 6. The Vampire infrared scope. The Zielgerät 1229, codenamed Vampire, was an active infrared night sight built to pair with the STG-44 or with the MG-42 and the MG-34, a 5-pound sighting unit tethered by cable to a 30-pound battery a soldier carried on a frame, strapped across his back. Fielded in the war's final months to a handful of snipers the Army called Nachtjäger, night hunters, it let a man see and kill in total darkness at a time when Allied optics could not. Only about 310 were ever built, and the moment one was recovered, it stopped being anyone's souvenir. Technology this far ahead of anything the Allies possessed went directly into technical intelligence channels for evaluation, not into a rifleman's kit bound for home. The plain difference between a trophy and a piece of the enemy's future that nobody in Washington wanted resting loose in a footlocker. A complete original Vampire outfit, rifle, sight, and battery frame together, is today among the rarest objects in the entire military hobby, reaching well into 6 figures on the rare occasion an authenticated example reaches auction. Most of what survives sits instead in institutional collections, exactly where the classification that seized it in 1945 always intended it to end up. Not everything the Army wanted for itself was made of glass and copper wire. Some of it was made of stamped steel, chambered for a rifle cartridge, and had been killing men since before the country that finally caught it had entered the war at all. Number 5. The MG-42. Firing at a rate approaching 1,200 rounds a minute, fast enough that individual shots blurred into a single continuous tearing sound. Allied troops learned to recognize, before they ever saw the weapon making it, Hitler's buzzsaw was built in numbers exceeding 400,000, and the infantrymen who heard it across a field wanted, in roughly equal measure, to never hear it again, and to own one for themselves. No certificate signed anywhere in Europe touched what the National Firearms Act had already settled in 1934. An unregistered machine gun was a federal felony the instant it crossed the beach at the port of return, a status that has never expired, and since the registry closed for good in 1986, never can be corrected by any process that exists today. A handful were registered, while the window for that was still open, and they sell now for tens of thousands of dollars, the tax stamp worth as much as the receiver it accompanies. The sound that made men want one for themselves outlived the war by 80 years. The paperwork to legally own the gun that made it did not survive nearly that long, and it never will again. Number 4, the Gewaltladung, the bundled demolition charge. German combat engineers built these in the field, wiring the explosive heads of 6 Model 24 stick grenades around one complete 7th grenade, its handle and friction igniter left intact, to create a single object with the blast of 7 charges and the fuse of only 1. Thrown against a tank's track or set against its engine deck, a bundle like this could do what a single grenade never could: break steel rather than merely fragment flesh. Circular 353's own personal souvenir language did not stretch far enough to cover it. It was, in the plainest possible arithmetic, 7 live grenades wired into a single package, and the men who searched captured German engineer stores in 1945 were trained to treat every bundle they found as fully functional until an ordnance team said otherwise, never as a curiosity worth carrying farther. Nothing about a demolition charge improves with age the way a rifle's finish can, or grows more valuable the longer it sits forgotten. The rare intact bundle that surfaces today in a barn or a collapsed outbuilding somewhere in Europe is handled exactly as it would have been in 1945. Fuse first, curiosity last. It has never once, in 80 years, been safe to mistake for a keepsake. Number 3, the I-hand Granite 39, the egg grenade. Smaller and lighter than the stick grenade it served alongside, roughly the size and shape its name suggests, the I-hand Granite concentrated its blast inside a thin steel shell fitted with a 3 to 4.5 second fuse, built by the millions and issued down to the newest recruit for the one reason its shape made obvious: it fit in a single hand and threw easily, further and faster than its bulkier cousin. That same compactness was what let it vanish into an American duffel bag without a second glance from anyone packing beside it. Its mechanism was almost insultingly simple: a friction igniter hidden under a threaded cap, nothing else, which meant a soldier convinced he had emptied or disarmed one could be wrong in a way that cost him fingers rather than warning him first. Simplicity in this one object was never a mercy. Deactivated, properly certified examples are common enough on the collector market today to be genuinely inexpensive, sold by the hundreds to buyers who want a small, complete piece of the war on a shelf. Somewhere in the country, most years, a bomb squad is called out to a house where an uncertified one has surfaced instead, and nothing about looking at either one tells you, from across the room, which is which. Number 2, the Type 97 grenade. Standard issue to Japanese infantry across the Pacific, the Type 97 was hand-primed rather than pin-pulled. A soldier struck the fuse cap against his helmet, a rifle butt, or a rock to start a 4 to 5 second delay before he threw it, which put the arming action in the thrower's own hand rather than in a spoon released on the way out of it. Bomb squads across the United States still answer calls involving old Type 97s on something close to a yearly basis. A donation dropped at a Wisconsin thrift store, a garage cleared out after a funeral, a shoebox in the back of a closet nobody had opened since the man who packed it came home. Almost every one of those calls begins the same way. A family assumed the grenade brought back in 1945 had been made permanently safe decades ago by someone at some point, and almost every one of those families turns out to be wrong. A properly deactivated, certified example is legal today and genuinely inexpensive to own. Every uncertified one still functions exactly as it did the day it was struck against a helmet and thrown, or not thrown, on an island whose name the man who kept it rarely said out loud again once he was home. Number 1, the Model 24 stick grenade. The steel hand granite, the long wooden-handled fragmentation grenade the first American troops, who saw one nicknamed the potato masher, sat in the belt kit of nearly every German soldier a GI searched in the war's last year. First issued in its Model 24 pattern in 1924 and produced by the tens of millions before the surrender, it was, by sheer volume, the single most common piece of enemy ordnance any American in Europe ever laid hands on. Circular 353 excluded any item containing explosives by name, so a grenade discovered at debarkation was removed rather than confiscated, the way a hazard is taken away rather than punished. And the ones that slipped past inspection anyway rode home in the bottom of a barracks bag, wedged next to the socks and the shaving kit, indistinguishable by weight or shape, from a hollow display piece a man might have bought at any curio shop. In May of 2023, a 47-year-old Indiana father named Brian Neidert was killed, and 2 teenagers were injured when a World War II-era hand grenade, found among a deceased relative's belongings, detonated inside a house in Lake County. It is one case among several the country has documented in recent years. In Virginia, in Indiana, in living rooms and garages from one end of the country to the other, of a war trophy carried home in 1945, finally going off on the family that inherited it, 78 years, and in some houses considerably longer, after the war that manufactured it ended. Every object on this list crossed the same ocean in the same year, sorted at the same handful of exhausted ports by inspectors working from rules, some of which had been drafted only weeks before the ships carrying these objects ever docked. 2 systems governed all of it. A signed certificate could make a pistol a man's own property, built for pride rather than danger. A federal statute 10 years older than the war itself could not be signed around by anyone, built for a country's safety rather than any one soldier's satisfaction. Neither system was designed with the other in mind, and neither one anticipated how long they would go on quietly colliding in closets and attics, decades after the men who created the collision were gone. What was genuinely dangerous tended to get caught quickly in 1945 because a live charge or a machine gun receiver announces itself to an inspector who has been trained to look for exactly that shape. What slipped through the same tables was quieter. A flare pistol with the wrong insert already threaded in, an egg grenade nobody thought worth an X-ray, a mine dug up as a curiosity rather than logged as unexploded ordnance, because it did not look like one at first glance. The paperwork caught the argument. It rarely caught the object itself. Some of what got through is still getting caught, just on a longer clock than any customs officer in 1945 was working. A bomb squad called to a thrift store in Wisconsin, a family in Indiana going through a grandfather's things the week after a funeral, a house in Virginia where nobody thought to ask what a relative had actually brought home. These are the same inspection, run 80 years late by people who never signed up to run it and never had the training the men at the pier were given. Somewhere in the country tonight, in a house whose owner has never opened a particular drawer at the back of a particular closet, a wooden handle rests against a folded army blanket, exactly where it was set down the week a soldier came home and stopped talking about the war. Nothing about it, from across the room, says which kind of object it is. It has been waiting to answer that question for 78 years, and it is in no hurry at all.